We're going to talk about how a stripper, a paraplegic, and a murderer, what those things have to do with me getting into Scientology. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Natalie, and this is Scientology Life After a Cult, where we talk about Scientology and culty things, my 35 years in this cult, and leaving with 3 generations of my family. Welcome to everybody in the live chat. Thank you for being here. If you could put question in front of your question, that would help in case you have any as we go along. I'm going to try and grab as many as I can because I've had many requests to talk more about this specific part of my story of what all these things have to do with me getting into Scientology. Thank you so much to the moderators. I see Mama Opal there. Thank you for being here. Thank you as well to the members. Your support means everything, and it really does help out here at Scientology Life After a Cult. All right, we are going to jump into this, but like I said, I'm going to keep an eye out for questions so I can answer them as we go and then maybe grab some at the end as well. If you've been following my channel, I got here on YouTube in December of last year after an interview I did with Aaron at Growing Up in Scientology and decided to go ahead and start my own channel and help expose Scientology, a cult that I was in for 35 years with multiple generations of my family. Now, I've shared a bit about this before, but we're going to get into it again. And I'm going to share, I think, a bit more details that some of you might not have heard. So, back to the beginning. When I was growing up, I was born and raised in Hawaii, and my father never got into Scientology. My mom had left when I was about 4 years old. She was gone for about a year, and she said she was leaving to create a better life for us. Things weren't good in my house. Both my parents struggled with addiction. My sister was about 2 years old at the time. Like I said, I was four. She was gone for about a year, and she came back. And when she came back, I remember she had these jean jackets that just stuck with me all these years later. Because I remember thinking how cool it was to have this little jean jacket as a 5-year-old. And she had gotten one for my sister too. And my mom said that she met someone named Brian and she was going to marry him. And the first thing I remember asking was, well, does he spank? And I remember she said no. And I thought, well, okay, I'm in then. That pretty much was a criteria. I'm getting jean jackets. He doesn't spank. This sounds like a good deal. I miss my mom. I'm all in. The man that my mother met was a Scientologist. And how they met is very unusual, especially for a Scientologist to be involved, to be where he was when he met my mom. Now, my mom she had a rough upbringing. She did not grow up in Scientology, but she had a challenging upbringing and experienced abuse in her family as she grew up. And she was on her own at about 16 or so. And she met my dad when she was in high school and she became pregnant with me. And I think by the time I was born, she was 18. So she was relatively young. So when she left when I was 5, that's just 5 years later, she's still in her early 20s, right? So my mom, when she left, because she lacked an education, she was a beautiful young woman, and she started working as an exotic dancer. And this is where she met the Scientologists, which is unusual because usually Scientologists will get in trouble for hanging out at places like strip clubs. It just doesn't go. But it was, it was the 70s and things in Scientology were a little bit different there. From the stories I hear from even people like Tori Magoo 44 here on YouTube, she has shared multiple stories of how things were different in the early days. Scientology, though still a cult, was not as heavy in a lot of the control that people experience today. So here's my mom working as an exotic dancer at this club. The Scientologist comes in, they meet, they fall in love. I think it happened pretty quickly. And an interesting thing about the Scientologist, his name is Brian. And not only was he a Scientologist, but he was a paraplegic. He had gotten into a car accident when he was in his 20s due to a drunk driver, and he became a paraplegic, and he was that way for the rest of his life till he passed away just a couple of years ago. So we go over, my mom takes us to meet Brian and see where they're living and all of that. And this is the first time we're introduced to him. And he's in his wheelchair. He was an incredible artist. He was at the time, in fact, throughout his lifetime, the most talented wood carver in Hawaii. He was known as the wood carver. Very talented. Despite his disability, he was an outstanding artist. After his accident, he taught himself to draw and sketch and sculpt, which then led to wood carving. Cajun, yes, you are a member. You're there in green. I can see you. So my mom, when she married Brian, she also joined Scientology, which is a religion that Brian introduced her to. Scientology and a life in Scientology was, in my mom's eyes, a step up from where things were. She didn't, she wasn't living with us at the time. We were with my dad, and she was still struggling with some drug use. And what Brian and Scientology offered was a little bit of stability. With Scientology, she was told she could get completely off of drugs and start, living a good life, living her best life. And of course, that appealed to her. She was looking for answers, that was for sure. And she found that with Scientology and with Brian. And Brian was a good stepdad. He was kind, he was fun, he was incredibly funny. He had an amazing sense of humor. That's the biggest thing that I remember about him. And those 7 years that we spent with Brian, as when I was a child, were some of my favorite times growing up. It was definitely probably more, and this is saying a lot, it was more stable than other periods in my life as a child. And that's saying a lot because that time when my mom got into Scientology, those first 7 years were anything but being really stable, at least by other people's standards, what they would think about that. So in, 1975, like I said, my mom meets Brian. They get married. My mom ends up winning custody of my sister and I, so we go to live full time with her and Brian. Now we're young. My sister's only 3, I'm 5 years old. We can't read or anything yet. So we don't really start doing much in Scientology at this point because, you just got to be able to read to be able to start your Scientology indoctrination. So you go through, within a couple of years, about 1977, something huge happened in Scientology. And I'm going to talk to you about this because it plays into my story and my mother's story. And what happened is the FBI conducted at the time, and maybe even since, the largest raid in their history, biggest raid the FBI ever conducted. And who was it on? Where did they go? It was Scientology. They were raiding multiple Scientology locations, and this was, I think it was like in 1977. I'm going to tell you a little bit of the backstory about that because it is important in understanding what happened next. All right, so we're going to take a look at a clip from a video that gets into how Scientology got 5,000 secret agents in the government. Scientology had been involved in the largest infiltration of the United States government and other governments. It was like 136 entities that Scientology had infiltrated. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at a little bit of this video, and it's going to help fill you in on what was going on in the 70s, around 1977 or so.
Soon, the Guardian office got worried that Agent Meisner would go to the police, and so just like any normal church would, they locked him up in a secret facility in California and put him under 24/7 surveillance.
Now, Meisner was a Scientologist who worked for the Guardian's office. Back then, the Guardian's office is basically what the Office of Special Affairs is today. The Guardian's office didn't go away. they rebranded. Scientologists, the government, and other officials were told that, oh, the Guardian's office doesn't exist anymore because the Guardian's office took the fall for the infiltration into the government. Like it was just a few, just a couple of Scientology bad actors. Didn't involve L. Ron Hubbard. It absolutely did. In fact, one of the people sentenced to prison because of this infiltration was Mary Sue Hubbard, the wife of L. Ron Hubbard. Her, along with, I think, 10 other people, ended up being sentenced to prison because of this. So Meisner, this Scientologist who worked for the Guardian's office, played a key role in this. And the Guardian's office / Office of Special Affairs today was worried that he was going to be speaking to officials. And did he ever? Take a look at this.
But it turns out that spies tend to be good at escaping, and after 3 months, Meisner eluded his captors, called the FBI, turned himself in, and told them everything.
Now, remember, his captors was Scientology. Scientology was holding this man against his will, and he escaped. He escaped after 3 months, which kind of makes me think later on, and this is when, remember, L. Ron Hubbard was running Scientology. David Miscavige wasn't even around at that point. He might have been in the Sea Org, but well, actually, no. He would have been a child like me, maybe a little bit older. Anyways, point being, he wasn't in a position of power the way that he is today. His whole takeover came later on. But you get the idea. So this guy's working for the Guardian's office / Office of Special Affairs. They lock him up. Scientology does, because they're so afraid he's going to talk. And what does he do? He talks. He gets out. He frees himself. And listen to this.
Which led to the biggest FBI raid in US history when 156 agents descended on Scientology's Los Angeles office, and in addition to finding e-meters and sci-fi books, they also found 48,000 incriminating documents, bugs, fake passes, lockpicks, secret codes, basically every
all the things, lockpicks, fake IDs, all of that, why wouldn't a church have that, right? Just things you would keep on hand, holding people prisoner. We can see that nothing changed. Not much changed later on. Later on, we learn in Scientology history that David Miscavige locked people in a double wide trailer who fell out of favor with him, known as the Hole, where they were emotionally and physically abused. They were deprived of sleep. They were deprived of food. They were deprived of basic human rights. So it's not like things got better later on in the Sea Org.
Everything you'd find in James Bond's suitcase, except instead of being owned by a secret agent, they were owned by a pretend church that teaches people that humans are ancient aliens living inside of bodies that were evolved from clams. The materials recovered in the raid revealed a ton more insane details about Operation Snow White. That an agent successfully bugged an IRS office where they discussed the church's tax-exempt status, that they'd got agents into the U.S. Coast Guard Intelligence Agency, the DEA.
Gee, I mean, these are big agencies. The IRS, they infiltrated the IRS, the U.S. Justice Department,
EA, and the American Medical Association, and even that Operation Snow White had branches in over 30 countries with codenames like Project Apple for France, Project Mirror for Portugal, and Project Witch for the UK, because what's an international criminal conspiracy without adorable matching nicknames? Later court documents suggested that across all of these projects, the Church of Scientology, a pretend church based on a sci-fi book, likely had as many as 5,000 secret agents infiltrating governments and organizations around the world.
5,000 around the world. That is just crazy when you think about how many people that are, especially when you look at today, where we're pretty sure, I think it's generous to say there are 20,000 Scientologists who actually still exist. There are definitely more people who have left Scientology than are in Scientology. There are more former Sea Organization members than there are Sea Org members. So through all this whole investigation turns up all this information about what happened, all the evidence there of what Scientology had been doing. And of course, these 11 Scientologists end up being sentenced to prison as a result of it. So this is the late 70s, okay? So now we're going to move ahead a little bit to 1980. And what was happening in 1980? In 1980, I was 9 years old, going on 10. My sister was 7. She would turn 8 at the end of the year. And she and I would go with our mom down to Waikiki in Hawaii to the Scientology building there, where my mom was doing the purification rundown. And she was also a Scientology staff member. Now, the purification rundown is the sauna program where you sweat out all of the drugs and the toxins that you had done before. So this is the program that my mom was on. Every Scientologist does it, but given her drug history, I remember she was excited about doing it. She also exhibited some strange behavior during this time. I can remember walking down an outside hallway in Hawaii. There's a lot of outdoor spaces in a building. Walking down and seeing her having an argument with somebody I can't see. Turns out she was arguing with a plant. She had just come out of the sauna. She was having what was described as some type of a flashback, something to do with LSD, and that was reactivating in her system and causing her to argue with plants. I mean, I didn't understand it at the time. Like I said, I was 9 years old. I was just about to turn 10. And as I had come to learn many of the times, it was just easier to just kind of let her do her thing when it came to Scientology. Kelly Copter, good to have you here. I'm glad you're here. So 1980, we're following my mom around Scientology in Waikiki. And as per usual, I had a real sweet tooth even back then. And my sister and I wanted to make some money to buy candy. So we would take pieces of paper and we would take pencils, pens, crayons, whatever we could get our hands on. And we would just draw images and try to sell them. First, we tried to sell them right there at the Scientology location at the church, right? Keep in mind, this is supposed to be our church. We're kids. We're little kids just going around saying, "Hey, do you want to buy this drawing for a quarter?" Just trying to hustle some candy money. And you would think that they would think, I don't know, maybe even that's cute that we're, taking the initiative to make some money. No. Scientology staff members told us that we couldn't do that on the premises, that we can't run a business. I'm not even joking. I'm not joking. We can't run a business and do that at the Scientology church/cult. So we took our business to the streets. We did. Right outside was all of Waikiki. The Alawai Canal was to the right when you walked out the building. And back then it had a very distinct smell that I remember. We stepped outside, the canal's over there, directly across the street is an apartment building. And there's a security guard who is always out there in the evenings. And my mom, she worked in the evenings and did her purification rundown in the evening. So we were always there evenings and weekends. So we go across the street, and my mom also at the time was what was called a body router in Scientology, meaning she would go out with her clipboard with a personality test, and she would approach people in Waikiki where it was very busy and say, "Hey, would you like to do a personality test? You learn more about yourself, whatever, whatever." She had a whole spiel. I had heard it so many times as a child because sometimes we would follow our mom behind her, where we would try to follow her where she couldn't see us just to see where she was going and what she was doing. And we would follow her back when people would follow her back to Scientology and do the personality tests. So I had heard over and over and over again what she says. So when we went across the street to talk to the security guard and to sell him some of our little pictures, our art that we had made, I also said, "Hey, you should come and do a personality test across the street." He didn't really say anything from what I recall, but he did buy 1 or 2 of our drawings. In fact, he's like the only person that did. Nobody at Scientology would buy them because we weren't allowed to sell them on property because it was in conflict somehow with Scientology. Like we were gonna be as these almost 8 and 10-year-olds, we were gonna be taking money away from Scientology by selling our little images. Absolutely ridiculous. So on brand for Scientology. So we go back, of course, right? Because this is where we're getting our candy money at this point. When we're there, we make more images. Sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't there, and his name was Mark. And we would look for him. And we would see him on occasion and same thing. Hey, we got some new art. It's something I do remember this. I remember him encouraging us something about how art is really important and it's something that you should do. I remember feeling at the time as a child that, wow, this adult thinks what I'm doing and I'm creating is really good. And that, maybe I should do art. Of course, I did not end up doing, although I do still do some adult coloring today. So I guess I did continue with that. So time goes by. And after a little while, we don't see him anymore. He's not there. And one day, our mom comes up to us and she is livid. She's pissed, bulging eyes and everything, in the really intense, quiet mom voice because she doesn't want people around us to hear. She says to us, because we were at the Scientology org, and she says, we have to leave. And we're like, well, it's not the time we normally leave. Like, why do we have to leave? She's like, we need to just leave. And we're like, okay, by the tone of her voice, we weren't about to be messing around with that. So we leave and we find out when we're in the car, she says, we cannot go back to the org and it's your fault. And at first I'm like, okay, one, I'm 10. How much of my fault can this actually be? And I start racking my brain thinking, what could I have possibly done that would result in us having to immediately leave the premises of Scientology and not go back? I also felt excited about this because I didn't like hanging out there. I wanted to be at home. And it was short lived because we were allowed to go back. I think it was just a couple of months that we were gone. But we were only allowed to go back under one condition: if we started our Scientology indoctrination as children. My mom would go on to explain when we were in the car on the way home and more later, because I said, well, what did we do? What did I do? Like, what happened? And she explained that the FBI had interviewed her. And I wasn't even totally sure what the FBI was at that time. And I thought, okay, well, the FBI interviewed her. Like, what happened? And she explained that Mark, the security guard, that my sister and I had gone back and forth from our building to his for some time, selling him drawings that we had done, inviting him to the org. He did go to the Scientology org. And I actually have a clip of a news program I found. It blew my mind, where Scientology staff members talk about his visit. I'm going to share okay, actually, I should tell you this first. Many of you already know this. Mark, the reason why it was a problem, the reason why my mom got interviewed by the FBI was because in December of 1980, when this was happening, we had seen him. I feel like we didn't see him after we started school, which would have been September. So I felt like we hadn't seen him for a while, which is why he never popped into my mind as a reason why we couldn't go back to Scientology. But it turned out Mark, the security guard, was Mark David Chapman. And Mark, the security guard, Mark David Chapman, had flown to New York and he murdered John Lennon. So when the investigation went on, he was working as a security guard in Hawaii. And there must have been, I don't know who figured it out, how that my sister and I were going back and forth, if there were cameras or just during the investigation that came up. Yep, Irina. Yep, that was the guy who killed John Lennon, Mark David Chapman. The security guard we knew as Mark, we didn't know his whole name, found out after that, was Mark David Chapman. So at some point before he goes and murders John Lennon, he goes into Scientology in Hawaii. I'm going to show you guys this. I can't believe I found this. It is from a news channel from back in the day. So let's see. Cubana Chica. Cubana Chica says, your artwork is in an FBI file now. I didn't even think about that. You might be right. You might be right. So I'm going to show you this. These are staff members at Scientology talking about when Mark David Chapman did go into Scientology. Because remember, every time we'd see him, I'd say, hey, why don't you come over and do a personality test? I mean, I was 9, 10 years old. What did I know? I had just seen my mom do this over and over and over again. Seemed like the thing to do. Little, did I know that he actually would go in. So let's take a look at this news piece here from back in, well, this would have been 80, maybe 81 by the time the news piece was done, because John Lennon was murdered in December of 1980.
Across the street at the Church of Scientology, they knew a different Mark Chapman.
All of a sudden, this guy, Chapman, just jumps in on me and starts screaming at me about this place being a cult and something really peculiar and attack.
Did you hear that? Mark David Chapman went over to the Scientology building as invited by moi and called them a cult, said that they were a cult. Just went over there and apparently was kind of nasty about it. But let's watch the rest of this. One, I can't even believe Scientology staff members were allowed to speak to the media about this. I guess back then maybe they were allowed to, but definitely moving forward, that absolutely did not happen.
Attacking me and swearing at me. I couldn't believe it. The guy and I looked at each other and kind of looked over at Chapman. And I thought, well, let me see if I can, just talk to the guy sanely.
What was his physical demeanor when he started verbally attacking?
He was kind of jumping around and dodging his head. Oh, yeah. Crazy.
He would stand out in front of the apartment building. Now, the women that lived in the
Dennis Clark, from what I recall, and if any of my ex-Scientology friends are in the chat, or if you're catching this on the replay, please jump in. Wasn't Dennis Clark also involved? Was it the Citizens Commission on Human Rights? It was one of Scientology front groups. I feel like he went on to get very involved in that.
The apartment building, he seemed to know every single one of them by their first names and greet them very cordially.
He's talking about Mark David Chapman greeting the people who lived at the apartment building that he was the security guard at.
Other girls walking by on the street would get obscenities, hey baby type remarks. Pretty strange character, and he spent a lot of time pacing very nervously.
I do remember that as a child. When I picture him in my mind, he is always kind of moving and pacing and looking around. I thought it's just because he was a security guard. I mean, as a young child, 9, 10 years old, it looked to me like, if he was a security guard, he's in charge of keeping things safe, and he's just keeping an eye on stuff. Okay, no one's jumping in and saying, yes, Dennis Clark was very involved in the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Oh, that's right. Irina says, yeah, Clark was president of Citizens Commission on Human Rights. That's right. I remember him being from Hawaii. That's right, Lady Pamela. Look at the porn stash. It was the time. It was the time.
I'd go out in front of the building, he'd be pacing out there. There's this incredible covert hostility about it.
Covert hostility, and that's the end of it. It cuts out after that. Covert hostility is specifically a term used in Scientology. It means someone standing there smiling at you, but they've got a knife behind their back that they're going to take out at any moment. It's 1.1 on Scientology's emotional tone scale. So you might hear that sometimes. And when you hear Scientology's story is someone's 1.1, that means they're 1.1. Covert hostility. L. Ron Hubbard said that homosexuals are 1.1. It's covert hostility. You have to, they can be criminals, all of these things that go along with this being this covert hostility type person. I was surprised that he would say that in a news interview, but should we really be surprised when it comes to Scientology about these things? Cajun 291, obviously he was already on the edge, but a cult can push someone over. Yes. And it didn't sound like he hung around, right? So what ends up happening, at least as far as my life goes, then we find all of this out. It's a lot to process. I don't fully understand it, but even at the age, by the time in December, I would have turned 10. I would have been newly 10, and my sister had just turned 8 in 1980. And we were just kids. We didn't understand a lot about this. We were enjoying the time away from Scientology. But what ended up happening is, of course, my mom wanted to continue in Scientology. What was that noise? Oh, no, it was just a speaker turning off. So what happened was Scientology said that my mom could come back. to Scientology and do services again. Only if my sister and I started our Scientology indoctrination. Of course, they don't word it like that. It was that my sister and I needed to be on course. So that's what happened. We were going to start our indoctrination in Scientology. And my sister and I started on course. We had done like a children's study course. We had done a children's communication course. That's the first course where you learn the training routines in Scientology. And you continue to do them over and over and over again. And the training routines in Scientology basically exist so that Scientology says it's so that you can deliver Scientology auditing, that it's a tool that you're going to need. In reality, it has a lot with maintaining control and getting a person to a point where they don't have boundaries, that they're comfortable being verbally abused. Because one of the steps in the training routines, even that we did as children, is you sit across from each other comfortably with your hands on your lap, looking at the other person straight dead in the eyes. That person can say or do anything to you except touch you. And if you react, if you laugh, if you move, if you get mad, if you cry, that person will say, flunk, you laughed, or flunk, you cried, or flunk, you flinched. And they're going to do whatever they did to cause that over and over and over again till you don't flinch, so you don't cry, till you don't get angry about it anymore. They call that flattening the button. So you can see how that plays into with children especially, and you do these throughout your career in Scientology as children, as young adults, as teens, you do it over and over and over again. So as you continue in Scientology, you become very much indoctrinated into this belief that you don't need to react to things, nor should you, which creates some pretty inappropriate situations for children. These natural feelings of I'm not safe go out the window, and they're replaced with I need to be here comfortably and face whatever is happening and not react to it. That one thing right there, in my opinion, is one of the most damaging things in Scientology, especially for children who grow up. It's one thing to do that to adults, but it's another thing to do it to children. Children who can't consent to be there, who just have to be there. If I didn't continue with these courses, my mom wasn't going to be allowed to continue in Scientology because it was our fault that she was taken out before and she needed to continue up the bridge to total freedom in Scientology. From there, I mean, it's a whole nother story, everything that happens after that. But we were there in Hawaii at the Hawaii organization up until, so honestly, it was actually probably only about a year, maybe a year and a half or so, because what happened after that is my mom divorced my stepdad, Brian, the paraplegic, who she met when she was working as a stripper in a strip club, who got her into Scientology. They split up all of a sudden, but my mom had news once again. She was going to marry my grandpa, the only grandpa that I known or had contact with, because we had no contact with my biological dad or that side of my family. And we wouldn't for another few years till I got old enough to insist and say, I wanted to see my dad. I wanted to see my grandparents who I'd not seen for, I think it was 9 years. It was about 9 years or so by the time I actually saw them again. So my mom marries my grandpa, who I then refer to a lot on this channel as Grandpa Dad because it got very confusing. My mom divorces my stepdad, marries his dad. That makes my stepdad my stepbrother. That makes my aunts my stepsisters. That makes my grandpa my dad, my stepdad. What does that make my grandma, who he was divorcing so that he could marry my mother? They're all Scientologists, by the way. My grandpa dad was like the cult leader of our family. He is the one who was the highest level in Scientology. He spoke and preached and talked about Scientology all the time. He hated the Hawaii organization. He only wanted people to go to Flag in Clearwater. So my mom marries Grandpa Dad and things kind of, continue on from there. And we don't hear anymore about the whole thing with Mark David Chapman and what happened. Just life goes on. It doesn't come up again. It doesn't come up for me anyways. I don't know if it ever came up again for my mom, but it was a huge part. It was like the thing that got us started on our actually the Scientology indoctrination. Stasia says, that's so Southern of your family. You know, my mother was from Florida. She ended up moving to Hawaii as a teenager when her dad moved there. Let's see. I'm just going to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Throw them out too if you guys have them. Let's see. Cajun says, Cajun 291, on top of cults' brain damaging strategies, blaming you girls for a traumatic event. Exactly. I did feel this weird sense of guilt about John Lennon dying for years. It wasn't so overwhelming that it like affected my life in ways, but I would feel it. And I even remember when my grandson, when Oliver was little, he was a little baby, a little toddler, and he really liked the Beatles. And he wanted to, I think it's because his other grandpa listened to the Beatles. And if we put the Beatles on, little Oliver would just sit there and jam. And I remember thinking, I'm always reminded of it and questioned my role in that. And I do know logically, I had no role in what happened. I was just a child selling photos. It was Scientology in making it feel like it was such this big deal that we had done something wrong, that I had brought this person into the organization. Now, okay, technically, now that I think about it, maybe I kind of did, but still, I was a child. I was a child mimicking what my mother had done tons of times. Hey, come do a personality test. I didn't understand everything that was going on about that. Kelly Copter, that must have been so hard, Natalie. Did they try to explain the grandpa dad thing to you? Can't imagine trying to understand that as just a little kid. There wasn't a ton of explaining. It was more, this is what's going to happen. My mom, I asked her, I remember asking her why, and she said she loved him and she was in love with him. One thing growing up in Scientology, and maybe it's not even limited to Scientology, some of you might have experienced this, because, it was in the 80s too. Things were, I think, a bit different there, or maybe it was just where I was, where we weren't allowed to question. We weren't allowed to ask a lot of questions, or this was a Scientology thing, express any upset. So the upset I felt about this, and I did feel upset about it. I was like 11 years old, I think, at the time. In fact, the thumbnail on this video was a photo of my mom and I. And that was right before she married my grandpa. It would be one of the last times I feel like we were all happily together as a family. It was for Christmas because things got weird. My stepdad, who I love and adored, wasn't going to be coming over to hang out with my mom and his dad, who are now married. So it tore our family apart, but no one was allowed to say anything about it. Cubana Chica, how did stepdad Brian handle it? Was he still a part of your life? I don't know what his emotions were about it at the time. I had the idea that he was not happy about it. It really seemed to come out of the blue. I suspect that my grandpa and my mom might have been having an affair prior to them letting their spouses know they want a divorce. In fact, I think it's almost guaranteed. It was so gross. So my mom moved us into grandpa dad's house with my grandma. My grandma was living there still. They were going to get a divorce. He moves my mom and us in. And I remember feeling like there was some weird animosity at the time. I didn't fully understand. I wasn't processing at that age thinking, wow, my grandma, this has to be so weird for her. I did to a degree, but like my aunts, there was an aunt of mine who lived there who took care of us a lot. And they never talked to us about it much. It was something that, and it's typical Scientology, you're not allowed to question, you're not allowed to talk back. It's just happening. Anna from Canada, do you think your mom was vulnerable and that is why Scientology was able to exploit her and her children? So glad she got out. Oh, yeah, absolutely. My mom was massively vulnerable. My mom had been, she struggled with addiction. And remember, she was only, let's see, 18, 19, 20. She was 23 years old maybe when she met Brian, the paraplegic, in a strip club where she was working. She was just so young herself. Actually, wait, no. Yeah. She was about 23, 24 years old. She was around, like, oh my gosh, when she took that picture, I'm not sure how old. I'd have to go back and do the math. But it was weird. It absolutely, I mean, it was. Cajun 291, you girls had nothing to do with Mark taking Lennon's life. I know you get that now, but guilt works weirdly. It does. It does. And I think it was because of the emphasis that Scientology put on that we did something so wrong, that we brought the FBI to Scientology. Now, this is why the FBI raid story from earlier plays into this. Scientology was so paranoid about the FBI, the raid that happened, being infiltrated. So it was a really big deal to have the FBI now looking at them again and questioning about Mark David Chapman. And did he have some connection to Scientology? Because, I mean, let's look at, Charles Manson had a connection to Scientology. So I get why, they'd be wanting to like run this down, especially knowing what they did about Scientology, who had just gotten in trouble for one of the largest infiltrations of the United States government ever to have happened. So I mean, of course they were over the top about it, and they didn't care that we were kids or we were trying to process or we didn't understand. It was just, we were in trouble. And then we needed to start our indoctrination and just focus on that. Stasia says, I hate when family doesn't take care of family unless it's toxic. Yeah, exactly. That's that's so true. Tina in the last 20 says, if a church believes in intermarriage, the rule is stick to fourth cousins, run away fast. Yeah. Now there was no blood relation except between my stepdad and his dad, because my stepdad was my stepdad. So my mom marrying him, it wasn't any blood relation, but it made it really, really weird. And I remember having a conversation with my aunt who took care of us a lot, and asking her, like, do I need to, can I still call you my aunt? Can I introduce you as my auntie still? Because I don't want to say my sister. It's too much to explain. My friends know I don't have sisters, and the age difference. Because remember, he was my grandpa. He was grandpa age, and my mom was in her 20s. So that alone was kind of gross. It was absolutely gross. Irina, hold on a sec, says, well, by cult of Scientology logic, you not only pulled Mark in, you pulled him into the org, which means the org pulled him in, made them look really, really downtoned and out PR. That's true. It kind of did, but they'll never pay attention to that. Reminder, hit that like button, everybody. If you're watching on a phone, just go ahead and double tap. I would appreciate that. And check your subscribe as well. Hey, Abraham, good to see you. Good to see you. Cajun said earlier, stability is key. Probably what led you to someone as supportive as Tony. 100%. I think everybody seeks that level of stability, especially when you didn't have it. I mean, in my life, when I look back, there weren't any. Almost every year I can document that some crazy thing was happening. My mom married my grandpa, Mark David Chapman, turns out to be a murderer. I mean, just one thing after the other. I joined Scientology staff in Hawaii when I was 15. My sister was trafficked into the Sea organization when she was 14. It just goes on and on and on up until leaving Scientology 14 years ago. And then leaving Scientology hasn't been without a lot of issues as well. They like to harass, but it's completely worth it. Tina in the last 20, people are innately clannish, and combined with religious beliefs has fostered intermarriages. When will evolve out of this mindset? When will we evolve out of this mindset? I hope so. Lady Pamela, how is your mom now and your relationship with her? That's a fantastic question. My mom passed away 2 years after we left Scientology. So I had 2 years with my mom, not in Scientology, and I gotta tell you, I wish that I was in the headspace during that 2 years to be able to talk about so much that happened when we were kids and in Scientology. But during that time, my mom, she was sick as well. A few years prior, she needed a kidney transplant, and I had given her one of my kidneys. And my mom had done all the way up through operating Thetan level 7. She was in the middle of OT7 when she got the kidney transplant. So she had at that point not really been that involved. She never got back on auditing on OT7, but she was active as a Scientologist until we left together. I left with 3 generations of my family. It took me 2 years to plan it. Irina says Scientology thrives on bringing in psychopathic and unstable people, putting them in enforcement positions. I mean, why do you think I ended up in OSA? Irina, I would love to talk to you about that story offline or online as well. Can you email me if you're open, Natalie@lifeafteraccult.com. I want to hear more about that. Lady Pamela, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that, Natalie. I've listened so much, but missed that. No worries at all. No worries at all. Cricket, did your mom find her way through her substance use? Yes. That is, she did. When she married my stepdad, she didn't have the same friends. She moved completely away from that part of the island. My family on my dad's side is from the North Shore of Oahu. So when we did start seeing my dad again when I was about 13, then I went back and would spend time on that side of the island. But she was living in what would be like the suburbs on the island of Oahu at the time. No, she did not do Narcanon. She just quit. She wasn't, I mean, she wasn't a hardcore drug addict. But she did abuse drugs and alcohol. But, I think it was her whole new life stability, right? Having her own place, having Brian, my stepdad, was a very stable influence for her. And he was so creative and fun. And I know that he loved her. I hope that she loved him. I think she did. I don't know when things started with his dad, but it destroyed everything. It did. Our family was never the same after that. We ended up moving out of the house, and my grandma stayed in the house with, I think, her son. And we moved into a house with grandpa dad, my aunt, my mom, me, my sister, on and off one of my cousins from Los Angeles, and my aunt's daughter. And it was just chaos on and off from there. I started drinking like when I was like maybe 12 or 13 years old with my family. And, that contributed, I'm sure, to later on issues I would grow up to have with alcohol. Not good at regulating it, which is why I no longer drink alcohol. Irina says, while there's such a thing as a soft drug addict, your mom was tough if she quit on her own with no support. Narcanon sucks, but recovering with real therapy is also difficult. Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things I wish I would have talked to her about more. Maybe it was so much harder than I ever knew about, and I just never knew because it's not something she talked about with us. It's something that she wanted to. It's not a part of her life that she was very open about. I learned a little bit more after we left Scientology, but not a lot. Not a lot. I wish I'd had more time with her or be further in my healing that I could talk about a lot of it. At that time, it was just too hard, too difficult to talk about. We were so focused on trying to build our life outside of Scientology, and my mom was sick. Even though the kidney transplant was a success, she was developing other issues, and she ultimately died of pneumonia because when you have a organ transplant, you have to take medications that suppress your immune system so you don't reject the organ. And she ended up getting sick and getting pneumonia and ended up passing away because of it, with no immune system to fight it. That's right, Abraham. I still can't get over Grandpa Dad. I get a chuckle every time. Yeah, me too. But it's the only way I knew to differentiate between my dad, my stepdad, and Grandpa Dad. I had one more stepdad after that. We just call him Corey. My mom ended up being married to him for well over 20 years and was married to him until she passed away and left Scientology with him as well. He left Scientology when we left. Good for you, Boxer Heather. You had the same problem with alcohol, had trouble regulating it, quit completely 3 years ago at age 52. Yeah, I think it's been like 8 years now for me. All right, let's see. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Katie did. Katie did. Only person who thought, why are those two kids out selling their art unsupervised was the crazy guy, right? Exactly. Later on, when I look back on this, I had that same thought because I remember him even telling us, don't go all the way down the street. You should stay right here. You should not go down there at night. And it was always night because that's when my mom worked. She worked during the daytime at the wood carving shop with my stepdad. And then in the evenings, she would go to Scientology and do her purification rundown and then do body routing for Scientology. You know, she was out there recruiting. Just a northern girl. Dang, all you wanted was some candy. Then you got a 30-year sentence. I know. It is funny when you think about it like that. Yeah. Stasiana, I'm surprised they let her get a kidney transplant in Scientology and didn't just claim she had Lyme disease. Yeah, there is, that is actually kind of a misconception. Scientology doesn't stop you from seeking medical care as long as it's not mental health care or taking drugs that they would consider mind altering, even like Zoloft, any type of antidepressants. You can't take anything like that. But my mom and I were very much Scientologists during her kidney transplant. And after my surgery, I was definitely on the morphine in the hospital and was on some type of narcotic. I forget what when I got out, but only for 3 days. I made the choice. I didn't like how it made me feel. I'd never done drugs before because I grew up in Scientology. And taking the medicine, it made me feel so out of it and disconnected. And like I didn't care what was going to happen if my children were playing in the street. And I had 3 young kids at the time. So I felt like I needed my faculties about me. So after the 3rd day, I switched to Advil. I think it was Advil, Tylenol switching off. And that was such an unnecessary thing to do because physically the pain was pretty bad. I mean, remember, I had an organ removed from my body. My surgery was over 5 hours. In fact, my mom's surgery as a recipient of the kidney was less. And I asked the doctor, why is my surgery so much longer? Being that you have to install the kidney with her. And he said, oh, we could be done with your surgery way faster if we didn't have to keep you alive. Then I'm like, okay, thank you for taking your time. But it was a huge surgery to recover from it. In hindsight, I wish I had stayed on the narcotic pain meds longer because it was really difficult. I remember being in a lot of pain. If I would laugh, with I had a young son at the time. My girls were a little bit older, but my son was still that age where he just wanted to jump on me, and that was no fun. I couldn't vacuum, just simple things. And even though we were both very active in Scientology, do you think anyone from Scientology came to help us? Brought food? Because when people have a major surgery, especially in the same family, right? If my mom was getting a kidney transplant and I wasn't the one giving it to her, I would have taken care of my mom. If I was donating a kidney and it wasn't to my mom would have been the one taking care of me. So it was very difficult for our family. And again, I had 3 young kids at home at the time. There was only one person, one Scientologist who came by, brought some food, and offered any kind of help. And she was halfway out the door at that when it comes to Scientology. I always got the idea that she wasn't going to be sticking around very long. Let's see. Stasia says, I can't thank you enough for listening to AA Ron and starting this. I've listened so much from you about the evils that is F Sciento. Glad you're out and living well. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you so much who've been here, whether you're new to the channel or you joined me in December after that marathon 4-hour video I did with AA Ron. And you can go ahead if you want to watch it. It's on my channel, but you have to look under videos. Click videos. And in there, I spill all the beans, all the tea. I had no idea it was 2 hours or 4 hours. I thought it was like an hour and a half. That was a crazy day. But it was after that I'm glad that I listened to him as well, because it's been incredibly healing for me to be able to talk about a lot of this, but be able to speak so freely about Scientology, to be able to make fun of Scientology, to be able to laugh and joke about Scientology. Huge. We're not allowed to do that in Scientology. It's called joking and degrading. You get in trouble for it. So every time somebody makes fun of or jokes about Scientology, I just feel like it's even more, it's healing. It really is. And it's a tough topic and subject to talk about, especially as a former Scientologist. So I like to balance it out with some fun too. And hopefully you guys enjoy that as well. I've been definitely leaning more into my humor side. And I found that very helpful. Anna from Canada, you're so wonderful, Natalie, for donating a kidney. You know what? You would have done it. Anybody would have done it. I mean, it was my mother, and she lived another 7 years. She definitely would have died. We all wish she would have lived longer, but we'll take the 7 years that we got with her. Made it worth it. And 2 of those years out of Scientology. Samantha, well worth the 4 hours. Watched it live. It was amazing. Wow, you watched it live? Ah, thank you. Lady Pamela too. Wow. That's impressive because that was long. Thank you for that. And again, if you've not seen it and you want to, on my channel, it's under videos. It's not because it wasn't, I didn't live stream it, but I uploaded it to my channel. So it's under videos. You can find it. Let's see. Danielle, much love, Natalie. I don't get to catch you live very often. I always watch the replays. Oh, it's so exciting that you're here. Just wanted to tell you that you're so strong and beautiful. I appreciate that. And thank you. You guys are so much a huge part of my healing in so many things, not just Scientology, but in working through. I mean, you guys have been with me. Were with me through the worst of Tony's illness. He had been sick for 3 years total, 2.5, little over 2.5. But the worst of it was after I had come onto YouTube, and your support and your kind words and your generosity made all the difference in the world for both of us. So when I say I really appreciate all of you, I really do, truly. And that we can now continue, chatting and talking about and exposing Scientology, but having fun as well. I like that. And I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you being here and doing that. Let's see. Cajun says, just FWI, I watched it live or shortly after, been a fan ever since. I appreciate that. That's so cool. That's awesome. Irina, I'm glad you started posting in the chat. You were a lurker for a while. I'm a big lurker. I started, well, I don't get into the chat too much because often I listen to content while I'm doing something else. So I don't always see the screen. Anna from Canada, thank you for being a member for 3 months. I really appreciate it. We appreciate you too, Natalie. If any of you are interested in supporting the channel through membership, go ahead. There's a link down below in the description of this video. And also you can click on join, but sometimes it's weird. I've heard that for iPhones, it doesn't always work. So one of the two, it helps hugely keep things going here. And I really appreciate it. Stasia says, you grew on me slowly. That's how I know you're worth it. I like that. I like that. That's awesome. Thank you. I'm so glad that you're here. Mountaintops. You should know your resilience is inspiring. Thank you. I appreciate it. You guys fuel me so much. Doing my recap every day, it gets me out of bed. It motivates me. I get right into working. And then often I can carry that through on my other jobs after I do my live stream and keep going. But it is definitely a highlight of my day. Doing these videos and talking with all of you is absolutely a highlight of my days. Let's see. Yep, Irina, you can do it as a YouTube, as a podcast. I do that all the time. Danielle says, I've also lost a significant other, Natalie. It's a pain nobody can ever know unless they've lived through it. I truly admire your ability to cope publicly and persevere because it's so hard. It is. Thank you. And yeah, sometimes I'm a real hot mess. I got to tell you, I mean, earlier today, I wasn't sure I was even going to do this video. That's how it goes. Boom, 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 boom. Up and down. Depends on what happens, what might pop up. For the most part, I'm doing well. There's still, And I think there's always going to be some degree, at least for a while, of struggle with it. But each day, it's like things just get a little brighter. Each day, I start to have a little more fun. And each day, you guys get to hear about it because you're here with me and you've been here with me. And anyone new to my channel, there's some videos I did with Tony you can always go check out too and kind of get to know him, as many who've been with me from the beginning have. Maria, Natalie. Hi, Natalie from Greece. I love Greece. You know, Tony was half Greek. He always said Macedonian, but I'm like, you told me Greek when we met. I signed up for Greek. I'm getting Greek. You're very strong. And I personally watched some of you. Unfortunately, real life has many similarities with the Scientology thing. Yes, many connections. And I love when our stories, or the things that have worked to help us through some tough times, or processing helps you. But the way seeing Scientology through the eyes of people never in Scientology has been one of the biggest things that has helped me in my healing, because you guys really just know what's what. There's things about my upbringing, about my time in Scientology, that I haven't even identified yet as not being, normal, for lack of a better word to describe it. But I love too that it's done without judgment. I never feel judged or embarrassed by any of my stories that are, okay, take that back. Maybe a couple of them were embarrassing, but you get the point. It's because of the way that you guys relate and the feedback. I so appreciate it. I appreciate it so, so much. And I really do enjoy being here with you guys and sharing about Scientology and my own story. And one of my favorite things to do is sharing the stories of other people. I've done a few interviews lately with ex-Scientologists and former Sea Org members, and it just continues to be so eye-opening for me. And hearing their stories and seeing the ways that they might be similar to mine, or that they were different times in Scientology, because Scientology has gone through its own cult evolution. And it's interesting to hear what things were like in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and so on. Always culty. That's a through and through. Let's see, Kraken Studio. My husband of almost 30 years is terminal, and you have supported me without even knowing it, knowing what's coming. I'm so glad. That makes me so happy. And I'm glad that you're here and you come in here. And I hope at times that we can provide some laughter, a distraction. Because what that one's saying, if you can't be a good example, at least be one hell of a cautionary tale. And there is, even bringing that levity to such a tough subject, I think is part of the healing, mostly because we were never allowed to do that. You were never allowed to make fun of Scientology. So doing it now, I'm just tickled doing it. It feels so fabulously naughty. Marcy says those my Tony videos are amazing. I want to watch them. I haven't gone back and done it yet. I would do it with you guys, but I just cry through the entire thing. But I do want to do that. Cajun says, humor without drama, aside from your great loss, discretion about other people's lives, very inspirational. Yeah, I appreciate that. Everybody is trying to get through their own day and get through their own life. And when you've been in a cult or a high control group, or you're recovering from some type of trauma, there's an added challenge to it. And it comes with ups and downs. And people are at different places in their healing as well. So I think the best we can do is just try to hold space for each other and, be kind where we can. And I think often we can. Cajun says, you don't judge, therefore we don't judge. I have never felt like I have any right to ever judge somebody. I mean, look at my background. I'm like, come on, I got 3 baby daddy, 2 ex-husbands and a baby daddy. I'm not going to judge you about your divorce or whatever it is. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. You guys know a lot of my story. And I feel like in sharing that, I want other people to be able to see, like, hey, whatever you have in your past, whether you're embarrassed by it or it's still holding you back, you can move beyond it. You got to find what works for you, whether that's therapy or another religion, whatever it is, yoga, got to find what works for you. Let's see. Oh, Laura says, telling my mom about Tony as she was being the badass she was dying. Cancer sucks. That's true. That's true. And Laura, I'm so sorry, Laura, for your loss. And thank you so much that many of you who've been through this, especially the loss of a significant other, has emailed me and we've talked about it and it helped me as well. I gained so much from other people's stories and experiences. It was that way in Scientology. When I decided to leave and I was executing my 2-year plan, it was the stories of people who'd left Scientology that I found online that really helped me and my family know we were doing the right thing because other people were seeing what we saw. That was so huge for me. And that is a huge part of why I decided to come back and expose Scientology again, because other people sharing their stories helped me and my family leave. So maybe sharing my story, maybe sharing the stories of so many other people can help people leave Scientology and other high control groups. It's not limited to Scientology. Other high control groups and cults, abusive situations share a lot. They have a lot in common. And I hear from a lot of you all the time that that's something that you're able to kind of connect and make that connection. Cajun Mama, I retired in December and discovered Aaron, and that's how I found you. Watching you help me grow and get used to my retirement. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I appreciate that. That is fantastic. That is so great. And it's so good to see you and the members as well. All right, you guys, I think that's what I got for you. Let me just double check. Okay, I did ask those. We are good. I'm going to be back with a recap tomorrow. There's already so much to talk about. I can hardly stand it. I was half tempted to jump into it. I'm like, nope, save it for tomorrow. 10 o'clock Central Time. You'll find me live. Catch it on the replay. Make sure you show that aloha to the like button and show that aloha to that subscribe button as well. Everybody get out there and have an amazing cult-free day.